Schools in the Archdiocese of Washington will no longer require masks in D.C. This following a local health ruling on Tuesday. That said, a lawsuit against D.C.'s mayor over the retracted mandates will continue. Neighboring jurisdictions had previously dropped the requirements. A COVID-postponed ceremony to beatify 27 Dominican martyrs of the Spanish Civil War is now rescheduled for June 18th. The war was fought in the 1930s prior to World War II. It claimed the lives of many Catholics. 11 are now canonized and more than 2,000 are beatified. Pope Francis begins a special canonization process for 16 Carmelite martyrs who died in the late 18th century. The martyrs were part of the 17,000 executions during a period of the French Revolution known as the Reign of Terror. And joining me now to discuss this is Kelsey Wicks, Operations Manager for Catholic News Agency and the ACI Group. Kelsey, great to see you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me, Tracy.
Kelsey, for those that aren't that familiar with this time in history, can you talk to us more about it and what it was like for Catholics in France?
Yes, the French Revolution was an interesting time period for Catholics in particular. It was an overthrow of the whole social and political order that also included a deliberate attempt to overthrow the Church's influence in society. So it squeezed the faith of the people in incredible ways. They, in fact, redesigned the entire work week to be 10 days so that people couldn't take the Sabbath day of rest. They confiscated and alienated church property. They forced the clergy and religious to take oaths in direct contravention to the faith. And of course, ultimately, they would execute many, many martyrs just for their religious practice.
It's hard to imagine all of that. Speaking of the martyrs, I'm going to talk more about them now. What more can you tell us about them, and also what led to their deaths?
Well, Tracy, I'm so happy to tell you a little bit of good news, which we need right now in the midst of this Ukraine crisis. And I think that these martyrs are emblematic of how prayer can change history. In the Easter of 1792, they will take a vow to offer their lives for peace in church and state. And they will renew that vow daily for 18 months until they are taken to their deaths. As they're carted along the way to the place of their execution, they go singing hymns of religious praise. And when they arrive at the place of their execution, they sing the hymns traditional to a religious consecration. And the novice, the lone novice amongst the 16 sisters, actually makes her vows into the hands of the prioress right before her death. And the manner of their mounting the steps to the scaffold is what is so impressive. Each one of them bows before a statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary that the prioress is holding, kisses it, and says, "Permission de mourir, mère," which means permission to die, mother. And she says to each one of them, "Va, ma fille," which means go, my daughter. And as the novice, who they make their deaths in order of religious age, the novice goes first and the prioress goes last. As the novice puts her head on the scaffold and the guillotine is about to close in upon it, she spontaneously begins singing the Laudate Dominum. And each sister would sing this song as they processed up to their deaths. These crowds who watched the spectacle of this blood sport were often raucous and just terribly, terribly awful. And the crowd was actually silenced by the witness of the sisters.
Wow, that is so amazing. Kelsey, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but I do want to talk about this. I understand that they're going through the equivalent canonization process. Can you explain to us how that differs from a typical canonization process and why and how often it's used?
Sure. Well, it's a very rare process. Equivalent canonization is simply a recognition of the holiness of some person or persons who've been dead for quite some time, and they bypass the normal miracle requirement by submitting historical testimony to the historian at the Congregation for Saints. So rather than have to find a modern miracle by someone who's invoking their intercession, they can look back and see, oh, in the past, actually, these have historical reliability surrounding them, and they also have heroic. They've also lived heroic virtue in their life, and there's a small cult around them, at least in a local place and possibly a larger place, and so they would meet the qualifications for canonization in that way. And so it would be equivalent to canonization, and it's simply done with little fanfare and the promulgation of a papal bull.
And we have about 30 seconds left, Kelsey, but wondering how you can talk to us about how these martyrs are still relevant today and what they can teach us.
Yes, I think that their grasp on the things of heaven and the way in which they died with so much joy is the single most important witness that they can bear to us in this day. You know, we can often feel frustrated at what's happening, persecution, death, and they lived in a time when 17,000 people were executed by the Reign of Terror. And yet they were able to hold on to the most important thing, which is that God is in charge of history, and he listens to our prayers. By offering our prayers and sacrifices, we can, in fact, change the course of history.
Oh, thank you so much, Kelsey, for sharing all this with us. We really appreciate it. Great to have you on.
Thank you so much.